we only fish one spot that we're catching fish, we're not going to learn the lake, are we?
No, and it's a good idea, as tough on the discipline it may be sometimes after catching a fish of that magnitude, to say, okay, let's go move somewhere else and explore that. So by the end of the day or the end of your time on the water, you've got a good basis for coming back for future visits or figuring out other lakes as well, because the lessons you learn on this lake are easily transferable to other still waters.
You mentioned we could drift these weed beds and pick up fish this time of the day, because we're into mid-afternoon. We got all the way till dark.
You bet.
And it's a good time. Is there a reason because of insects moving into the weeds? Or
we noticed in our shore sampling lots of potential food sources. It's the home base for many of those prey items. We've also seen that constant parade of minnows right along the edges, and the trout will come in and herd them up, come out of the depths, hopefully pick off a few stragglers and then move back out. So they're constantly moving in and out of these weed edges, and with the wind here we get a bit of a break so we can present our flies in the manner we want to present them, not the way Mother Nature's trying to dictate to us. And as you mentioned, with the double anchoring system, we can look for the inside corners like the one we've been fishing here off the shore, and we can fish one direction. One angler can fish downwind, the other one can fish crosswind, and again we can cover as much water as we can with a variety of different techniques.
we're going to try a variety of techniques to teach our folks what you know, and hopefully we can be successful. And I know that right now, along these weeds, we got our first good fish.
And it's a sound strategy to carry on that and just explore different areas of the lake using the same methodology and kind of build and grow our knowledge base of this lake and its habits for future visits and future visits to other still waters.
So let's go. I mean, this talking is not getting us anywhere.
No, let's go wet some lines and drown some flies and hopefully get some arm exercise.
Fire up the electric motor. I know that my experience with fishing lakes, Phil, is that most people that have never fished a lake before can't understand why the fish just aren't right there. And they move around.
Yes, they're constantly on the prowl. Now they will, depending on the times of the season, they will cruise certain areas and hang out in certain areas. Early in the year when the water temperatures are cool and the oxygen content is good, one of the things to remember is water temperature increases, its ability to hold oxygen decreases. So that's going to have an effect on where trout are going to be. So you may find trout in the spring in the shallow reaches of the lake, and by midsummer it's just simply too warm for them to be there. You're going to have to move into deeper areas in that 15, 20 foot or perhaps even deeper depending on the particular conditions of the lake.
There's no question that you have to be in the zone. Our friend Denny Rickards, that's his teaching. You have to be in the zone.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you're not, the fish feed in the zones. And, I'm sure that you can always pick up some fish with a sinking line right on the bottom with a lot of patience. Mm-hmm. But that isn't a lot of fun, is it?
Not usually, and for the most part, we like to focus our efforts in that water less than 20 feet deep. Again, that's where your food sources are going to be most prevalent, and this is where we have the widest range of presentation options. We can use floating lines, intermediate lines, clear intermediates, slow sinking lines. We can do a variety of different presentation techniques to take advantage of that prime water that we're best suited for.
I think when it comes to lake fishing, you can't get enough education. And to read books by you and Brian Chan and Denny Rickards, make sure you get as many of the DVD teaching videos that are out there, because there's so much to learn here that not one person knows it all.
No, you never stop learning, Jack. That's a motto on my own website, because you never stop learning.
That's the first rise I've seen.
Yep, and that's, again, upwind and just off. We can see the shade here.
Yep.
You can see that that's just on the deep water. So we want to work our flies. We can cast them out to the deep and let the wind-induced current sweep them down a lit and then bring them back up and hopefully run into another big rainbow.
Now, I fished a lot in Europe, and they do this a lot in a boat with no motor. Mm-hmm. They drift with the wind. Yes,
they have a different approach. In fact, a number of still waters I follow, being a an ardent Stillwater fly fisher, I pay close attention to the European scene. I've learned a lot from the methods and techniques that they've done and been able to successfully adapt them to North America. And many of the Stillwaters there, it's not part of the rules to anchor, whereas here, sometimes amongst a sea of anchored boats, you might get frowned upon if you drift through them all.
Right.
So it's kind of a different way of looking at the problem. But they use big underwater parachutes called drogues, and they'll tie them off to the center of the boat, and it just controls the drift of the boat and keeps the boat centered. It's a little bit of positioning, and they just work the flies, and the boat basically drifts them over. I've done it myself on some occasions. It's a great way to cover water over a big, vast shoal of fairly consistent depth. You can work a variety of methods. They believe firmly that, that your flies are always being shown to new fish. So if you're anchored in one area, there's a good chance that fish will see your fly a couple of times. You don't even know about it, not be happy with your presentation or your fly pattern choice, and you're just not having a good day.
It's called lock style, and they do it in the World Fly Fishing Championship. And it's a hard technique, and you can't fish upstream. You have to cast upstream, but downwind.
Downwind, and they just slowly retrieve the fly line for the most part. They do vary the retrieves, of course, but they just stay in contact with those flies. North American Stillwater fly fishing seems to be more favored around either trolling around using fins or paddles in a pontoon boat or a belly boat, or as we prefer to do and a lot of times in our aluminum prams, is just anchor and work the fly and just vary our, pick a likely looking spot that's a good area that a fish might patrol, and just work our different presentation techniques and fly patterns until we find success.
Would you still look at chironomids here?
I would for the most part, but I'm still not seeing a lot of shucks on the surface, and your observation doesn't stop once you leave the shore. I always say your head is constantly on a swivel. You're looking as you have looked. You've noticed rising fish, so that gives a clue that we're in a likely looking area. We're looking for organisms on the water. We're looking for shucks of emerging insects such as chironomids, and we're just not seeing a lot here. There's a few. There's one drifting by there now, but not a lot of activity. This wind is going to affect it. You also want to learn to look with your Polaroids through the water and see what's underneath the surface. And you can see leeches swimming by from time to time, damselflies migrating by, or schools of minnows, or even a big rainbow cruising by. So your powers of observation are key, both on the shore and especially on the water.
My experience with coaching the U.S. fly fishing team in Europe, watching the other countries fish lakes, they'd laugh at us using 2 flies here. They'd say, why are you using that few of flies?
Yeah, it's funny. And in Alberta, we can use 3 flies here. In your home state of Wyoming, what's the regulations there?
I think 5 maybe. 3 is pretty common in the U.S., but in Europe, in England, you can use 5.
And in British Columbia, as we talked about, 1 fly only per rod. So different regulations cause you to use different techniques, but if you can use droppers, I strongly encourage you to give it a try. Not only can you eliminate different potential food choices. For instance, I've got a leech pattern on my intermediate line right now with a bead-headed scud pattern, and I'm also offering a variety of size. The leech is fairly large. It's a number 6 leech, and my scud pattern's a number 12. So I've got a disparity in size there that we can see which is working better. And we're also covering different water depths as well. So we have the opportunity, as you alluded to, that depth is so critical that our flies can cover 2 different zones during our retrieve, and we can hopefully find fish that way. Plus, it's always exciting, never knowing which one they grabbed.
I've got a question I'm going to have for Brian that I'll ask you. We'll get 2 different answers. I've been on lakes, especially lakes, where guys have been just like side by side, using the same flies, same almost identical techniques. One guy's catching fish and the other guy's not. And it happens more on lakes. What's your answer to that? Why does that happen?
And it's happened, it's happened to me personally, and I've had those days where nothing can go wrong, and I've had those days that, man, I couldn't buy a fish if I was standing in a supermarket. I recall one time I was doing a chironomid class, and I had a student in the boat with me, much the same as yourself, and I gave him the I gave him the fly I was using. And cast it out into the spot I was casting, and he still didn't get a fish. So I changed over to the fly he had, and I took a fish. So I actually had him cast his indicator within 3 inches of mine, and they're both sitting there, and mine went down. Exactly the same technique. Sometimes I think it's just attention to detail. The successful angler is perhaps doing something, a little variation in the retrieve. It could be their flies just over slightly different water. It's sinking at a slightly different rate. Their leader may be longer, shorter, lots of little variables. I usually start by really getting micro and really examining what line, what leader, what retrieve, what fly, how's he tying it on. You know, does it have good movement? Is he using a loop knot, which we use a lot in still waters to make that fly move? And just try to eliminate and find out. And then there's always good old Mother Nature and good old luck itself.
I was waiting to see if you'd get to that.
We also have to consider the situation where one angler just happens to anchor on the pot of gold, and those fish are just swimming around 30 feet behind his boat for some reason. It could be something biological, like there's a spring there, but more often than not, there's a bit of luck involved because, like any other activity, fishing involves a bit of good luck.